Good morning and welcome to the Pondering Show here on WKUR, your country road. I'm your host, Doug Ponder, and I'm coming to you live here at the Don Franklin Chevy Buick GMC studios here in Arroyo Valley. Well, it's been a big time for high-quality TV this past week, wasn't it? The top dog in America gave his State of the Union address to the nation on Tuesday. President Barack Obama might have got around a couple of thousand viewers, give or take a few. But his performance during the address has also been nominated for 6 Emmys. Good luck to him on the red carpet, President Obama. But in all seriousness, though, the State of the Union address is really starting to become ridiculous, and it's actually been that way for a few years now, no matter who is in office. Each of the two main political parties don't clap or stand up when the opposing political party's ideas are being presented, and they often bicker with each other and give rude looks to each other. Wait a minute. That sounds like a typical episode of a reality TV show. Now, the only reality TV element that is missing with the State of the Union address is the part where they vote a member out after each show. You know, like they do on Big Brother, Survivor, and some of those other corny reality TV shows. Well, the good news, reality TV fans is that Obama has now made it to where a member of Congress gets voted out after each State of the Union address. He did it by executive order. You know, he does that often. But this year, Speaker of the House John Boehner has been casted off Capitol Hill for his lack of participation and the disgusting faces he made during the State of the Union address. Our very own State Senator Mitch McConnell came in second, and he stayed on for another season, but he's in danger for next season. Now, Obama also announced his free community college plan idea during the State of the Union address on Tuesday. The plan calls for free tuition for students who attend classes at least half the time. Come on, kids, that's all you have to do. And make at least an average of 2.5 GPA. Now, free community college is a big step for our government. Of course, you know how some people are. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Now, Obama was blogging and tweeting with the younger generation about the idea before he presented it to the State of the Union on Tuesday. Our high school senior asked Obama if they would also order everyone a free large one-topping Papa John's pizza for the address Tuesday night. Now, Obama retweeted him back and said that would cost too much and would be wasteful spending, and they don't do things like that up there. Now, even though we haven't ordered you a free pizza either, we still have a great show lined up for you today. Now, we will be talking about a recent 160-point blowout win in a high school basketball game and how that affects players as far as being competitive and showing sportsmanship. So stay tuned and don't go away. Welcome back to the Pondering Show here on WKUR 94.9, your country road. Now, we are joining you from the Don Franklin Chevy Buick GMC studio here in Arroyo Valley. Now, our guest this morning is the head coach of the Rockcastle County Rockets boys basketball team. Benny Blanton, thanks for coming in the studio and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and explain this to people because some people might not have saw this story in the news, but here's the deal. In case you haven't been listening or watching, a Southern California high school head basketball coach was suspended, and here's the conflict. I researched this. He was suspended by his own school or school district after his team beat another Southern California high school team by more than 150 points. And it's Arroyo, I don't know if I can pronounce that name, Valley High School, girls head coach Michael Anderson, and he was suspended for 2 games after his squad beat Bloomington High School girls team 162-2. Now, Anderson said he wasn't trying to run up the score, and he also pointed out that Bloomington had already lost another game this season to another team by 91 points. That's his showing the sportsmanship right there. Now, Anderson went on to say that he didn't play any starters in the second half and that he wasn't trying to embarrass anybody. And in another interview earlier this week, Anderson said that he only pays attention to coaching his team and not the other team. But Bloomington head coach Dale Chung said that Anderson's team used a full court press defense for the entire first half to lead 104-0 at halftime. And he said people shouldn't feel sorry for his team and that they should instead feel sorry for Anderson's team because they aren't learning the game the right way. So here's the deal. To a lot of people, this is a discussion between which is more important, competition or sportsmanship. So, Benny, to start things out, we're going to briefly discuss the rules as they pertain to so-called blowout games. So the rules are different in every state, obviously, probably, but here in Kentucky, high school basketball game rules are governed by the KHSAA. And how do they decide those rules, and how do they decide how they enforce them?
Well, the high school rules are actually, like when they send you a rules book each year, it's actually from the NFHS, which is the National Federation of High School Athletics.
Oh, okay.
And what it is KHSA governors, they just govern their the athletics for boys, the athletics in high school basketball in the state of Kentucky. Now, and they can change some of those rules as far as just like they have a mercy rule in high school basketball now that if you're ahead by 35 points or more, the clock doesn't stop for any dead balls or anything like that. It's called a running clock.
Okay, yes, okay. And so there is a national organization, like you just said, and it's kind of like the government. There's a federal government and a state government. So, and then the KHSA governs that. Now, and you mentioned the running clock, and that was confusing to me at first, but now the two coaches in the game talked about the issue of the running clock. And explain what that actually is exactly and how that works here in Kentucky.
Well, in the state, in our games when we play, if one team gets ahead of another team by 35 points or more, then the clock doesn't stop. It doesn't stop for out of bounds of any sort. It doesn't stop for free throws. It doesn't stop for anything except for a timeout.
Okay, so that's big.
It is.
Yeah, because it just makes things go faster. And so you mentioned the so-called mercy rule, and that's actually in the national level where that's at, right? So as far as Kentucky high school basketball games, do they have it? And if so, how does that actually work, and what are the actual rules for it? And does coaches actually agree to that on like a game-by-game basis, or how does that work?
Well, I don't know that that's actually a national rule. That's a KHSAA rule. That's just for our state. I don't know if other states are different points. They may be 30, whatever. It's just a Kentucky rule that what we do. I know there is a rule in there that if it's below, like varsity level, junior JV or freshman like that, you can actually talk about cutting down quarters, time, whether it's for weather or something in this area.
Yeah.
If you wanted to not play that last quarter, you and I as coaches, we could agree and say, well, listen, we're not going to play that last quarter.
Okay.
We need to start this varsity game to get out of here, before the weather gets bad or something like that. But you have to play a certain amount of time in the varsity level, and that the running clock is just a way to keep that game going and not let a team,
just continuously run and pound.
Yeah, just run and pound.
Okay. And that's a KHSAA rule. And like you mentioned, I didn't really research that topic exactly, and I didn't even know there was a national organization. That's how ignorant I am to all this. Evidently, I guess California does not have that, because that would have definitely had to have come into play for this game in particular. So are there any other high school rules that pertain to blowout games or running up the score here in Kentucky? And if so, what are they?
Well, I don't know of any other rules, but I know, going back to that California incident, the thing about it was they probably had to play so many minutes in each quarter that they played.
Okay.
But they couldn't agree, like I don't know if their rule was not 35 points and keep a running clock or whatever, but I know they also had a shot clock in there. It's something that KHSA does not do.
Exactly.
So we don't have, and there's states I know that do, and it said I read an article about that incident, and they had, whether it's 35 or 40 seconds, I can't remember, but you have to shoot within that shot clock. So therefore you are going to have to attempt to score, every 35 or 40 seconds, whether you're losing or winning, either way. So that does make a difference.
Yes, exactly. And I assume, like you mentioned, they had to have that, and it's just different with each state. So that's it seems like they're, and I would say, and we'll get into this more as we go along with the show, but this game in particular probably will be like a headway for issues like this being talked about, because it's caused a big buzz with things.
Right.
And this national organization will probably step in too, more than likely, with it.
Well, and I really don't, I wasn't trying to defend that coach, really, because I really don't think, the first half they were up, 104-1, maybe?
Yeah.
And the coach in his interview said that he wanted to play his type of game for the first half at least. But I do think sportsmanship comes into that somewhere along the way, that you do not have to press. I don't know what kind of offense you don't run an offense when you press full court. You're
That's
going
right.
to get layups. There's no way they could have scored 100 points without scoring majority of those as layups.
Yeah. And based on what that, I didn't actually see any highlights of that game, but you can pretty much picture what happened. I would say that they only had like a 5 or 10 second possession, and they just, they were so much more talented. They just lollygagged down there and lay up, and then they turned them over all the time. That's probably what happened. Yeah.
If I was guessing, I would say that other team probably couldn't get it past half court.
They probably couldn't, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about and analyze the views of those in favor of the Arroyo High School head coach, Michael Anderson, and those in favor of the other head coach. So stay tuned and don't go away. Welcome back to the Pondering Show here on WKUR 94.9, your country road. We are joined in the Don Franklin Chevy Buick GMC studios with Rockcastle County Rockets boys basketball head coach Benny Blanton, and we have been talking about a Southern California high school coach who was suspended for 2 games after his team beat another team by 162-2. So, Benny, now coaches often teach their players to play hard and give it their all on the court. But should they teach them not to play hard or give it their all if their team is blowing out the other team? Is that actually sending the right message to the players?
Well, it is a tough topic. I would never want my kids to not work hard. And, that's one thing about being a high school coach of any sport. That's one of your jobs, I feel like, is to teach a good work ethic and discipline. Mm-hmm. But you also, in that, you have to add integrity and character, too.
Yes.
So if you... if you teach them a little bit of integrity and character about it, and I think my school, me teaching school, has a little bit to do with my opinion about this. I'm not going to, if I have a student that's going to be a better student in math than this other student, I'm not going to let him pound it into the other kid that he's that much better than that kid.
That's right, yes.
And I feel like that in high school sports, and the thing about us, like as high school coaches in basketball, we have 2-year contracts against teams, and therefore, if you beat me by 100 points, I'm not going to play you next year.
That's exactly right. Yes, yeah.
And I know if you're in the same conference or district where you had to play them each year, then there need to be some way that you'd looked at redistricting or reconferencing or something. And that's hard in high school basketball sometimes because they may be like us. We're not classed by A or 2A or 3A or 4A. It's all one class. We can play a 5A school or we might play a 1A school.
Exactly, and that's true.
As a matter of fact, in our district, you look at Pulaski and Somerset. We have a smaller school in Somerset, but then we have a bigger school in Pulaski. They're both in our district, a 5A and a 2A. Mm-hmm. So you never, it's hard to say. But I would never, my kids, there has that point of coming about a little class about yourself, too, that, I'm not going to. It might come back on me if I did that to somebody. Too.
Exactly.
There's a lot of teams out there that could beat us that bad if they really wanted to, and there's teams that we could beat really bad if we wanted to.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what it sounds like to me. And I'm not for sure if they have that type of class system. It's like you said, it's different in every state, and I tried to research that in California how it worked. But it sounds like they need to be redistricted out there, or something needs to happen. If they play these, and I'm not even for sure if both those same teams are in the same district. But if that was the case, gee whiz, I would be advocating for a different district if I was that Bloomington High School coach, no doubt.
Right.
But
and I really think this happens in girls basketball probably more than others. I don't know if you can remember this back years ago when we were in the 13th region. Yeah. Oneida Baptist, our girls, we had a really good girls team, and our girls probably beat them 80-4 or something like that a couple times now. Yeah. And there's no doubt in my mind that Coach Noble could have probably beat them 160 to
exactly same
if
thing.
She wanted to.
Yes.
But you can't. She didn't. She chose. You can't press that whole time, and and if you wanted to sub, I'm sure her starters didn't play past 2 quarters at the most, and I'm sure they didn't press that whole time.
Exactly.
Even with your sub,
Yeah, exactly. And that's the next question we have, and that's what this coach Michael Anderson said. He said his team plays with an up-tempo game style, and he plays with a full-court press defense, and that, if a team's beating another team badly, if their style of play has that full-court press defense, and that's his position on it, that's what he teaches that's his style of play. He's saying, should we tell him not to do that? as far as them as future games and them hurting them in future games.
I wonder. Like I said, I didn't read a whole lot about him. I don't know about how that good they are or how bad they are. But I just wonder if he's playing a team that can handle his full court press. What does he do?
Exactly.
Does he still continue to do that and let them run through it and score baskets, or does he change his coaching style and go to a zone? And if he does,
that's true.
Then he's going against his own. He's kind of contradicting what he's saying, because if he may be able to actually press against every team he plays, but I would find it hard to believe that
that's
here,
possible.
Yeah, in our it wouldn't be possible here. I don't think in our state about doing that unless you had one of the higher teams in the states, girls or boys.
And that's true. And it's like I said, he probably contradicts himself. And we see it on the college level. There's a big deal with that. You hear a lot in sports news, but. That's a good question. We'll have to dig deeper in that. I don't know if any sports analysts have touched on that. That is a good question. But now, and that's the other issue. Could the coaching decision to not play your style of play possibly cause some players to get out of sync with their style of gameplay and cause them to not play with high energy in future games when it's more needed, such as like district tournament or tournament time?
Right. Maybe you could, but why couldn't you just play a half-court trap, something that you can still use a high energy doing, but not in a full court, area,
Yeah.
And play, you think about teams like Louisville. Rick Pitino has always loved the up-tempo style and the type that he plays. But, and a few years ago, he started playing some zone. They do trap a little bit out of it and playing instead of just man-to-man and full court all the time. He does play a little bit of zone. And, it's because he adjusts, and being able to different coaching style, but yet still using his same strategy of up-tempo and the same, up in any kind of defense.
And that's the thing. Good teams are able to adjust to stuff like that.
Yeah. And I also wonder about that guy, if he's really I feel like in practice, if you want to stress that kind of defense, and obviously he's got more than just 5 good players. If they can beat other teams by that much, and he's using his second string, then they could work on that a whole lot in practice. You look at our platoon system for Kentucky. How good are their practices? If they, so they can get a lot better at that point.
Yeah, and see, that's the other. Kentucky's kind of a good example of that. And often with young players, it's easy to get out of sync. Kentucky can get out of sync very easily. Bless their hearts, Even as talented as they are, they can get out of sync, And that was another argument he had. He does that so they don't get out of sync. Well, it's like you just said, So I don't know, but that's his argument. And then also, and I saw he does. He averages. I saw their schedule on the internet, and he's beat a lot of teams by 70 points or more. I don't know what kind of district they're in, but this is a big deal. They just need to be redistricted. And like I said, that score just got the buzz of the whole nation and the sportsmanship issue pretty much. But and then the other issue, does beating every team by 50 points or more not teach players, like you mentioned before, things like respect and integrity and sportsmanship? Does it not teach them those things?
Well, I don't know. And I read a few articles about this, and when there was debates on, people would comment on it one way or the other, and people were saying, "Listen, you can't." And some people didn't really know much about basketball. They were saying, "Listen, we don't want to teach kids to be losers, or whatever. Maybe they should the kids on the losing team should try to learn something from this, and go on." Instead of
that's right. Learn from failure.
Yeah, learn
that
from
argument.
Failure.
Yeah.
But now, what is the other team? What are they learning from it?
Yeah, see, that's the other argument too.
But and it's easy to go by and shake somebody's hand after you win. But what if some team beat them that bad? Would they still go line up and shake their hand just like they did?
If they were never used to that, if they never experienced that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And how often does that happen? And UK has that problem. And that just dawned in my head. When we recruit these high players here at UK, they come from schools that blow out teams too, and they score 20, 30 points a game each. And then here they are, and they get in here and they struggle against these other experienced teams. Oh, it's just like a deer in the headlights. And they struggle emotionally, just like you mentioned. When that happens to them, they react kind of not cocky, but it hurts them.
Right, it does.
Yeah.
You take Andrew and Aaron Harrison, there's probably not a lot of 6'6" guards in high school level.
Yeah.
So it was a big adjustment for them when they came to college, and people could guard them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I do think they struggled a little bit. And how you hear Coach Cal talk all the time about their they're on the floor, how they act and what they look like, and how they're, holding themselves up, or whatever, not pouting or anything like that. And it's different for the kids. Have to learn that.
Yeah.
A little bit of adversity can go a long way sometimes.
Oh, yes, it can. It can. And adversity is the greatest learning. It's one of the great learning tools in one sense, too.
It is.
And that leads to the next question. What kind of struggles, and we touched on this, can a coach encounter if a team loses by 50 points or more almost every game? Is there something, that something can be learned from that?
Perseverance, I guess. And not ever giving up. At least, if you can still field a team after you've lost that, then at least your kids aren't giving up, and they continue to try. If you keep going to practice and and work hard every day, that's all you can do. I try to stress to my kids, it's up to us to make a better society, really, and how we do that is by going to work every day and get and whether you win or lose the night before, come to practice the next day and be ready to work as hard as you can to get better. Sometimes we don't focus enough on progress, about where you start from and where you get compared to just wins and losses. And the thing you mentioned before, the progress, is a lot of times more important than wins and losses. Especially when it comes to tournaments and stuff. Yeah. And that leads to another thing. What are some of the other things that, players can learn from the game of basketball that, the basketball teaches players? I mean, can coaches teach players these things to a team that, gets beat by 150 points or more? Is it possible to teach those type of things to a team like that, you think? I think it is. I know on ESPN a lot of times they'll show really good motivational stuff. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, when there was a coach that had coached a real some troubled youth girls team, and they've lost, I forget how many hundreds of 100 and some games in a row or whatever, and more than likely a lot of them not even close. But his teaching was not about them winning or losing. It was about them getting better and getting over some of their struggles in life.
Yes.
And some maybe in just an independent high school somewhere, you're not going to have necessarily the troubled kids that they have, but you can still teach them the perseverance. And if you want a job, go get that job.
Exactly.
Work. Don't give up on that job. Don't give up on what you want to do in life. You want to write for the New York Post, or whatever. Don't give up on it. Keep working. Right. If you fail 2, 3, 7, 8 times, whatever, keep doing it. Eventually you may get an opportunity, and when you get that opportunity, make the best of it.
And that's great coaching right there. And sports teaches those things.
It does.
And that's one of the things that's important, and that's teachable to everybody. And that's more prevalent in players that have experienced failure than other players who haven't, like these kids that come in the UK a lot that have won every game by 50 points or more. They've never experienced things like that, and they're able to understand, hey, if I fail, I can still work and still get to that point. Where a lot of times other players are just not, they things that constantly keep coming to them. They've never had that experience of failure. Yeah. Now, and here's the granddaddy question of them all, I guess. Is it possible to teach players to be fierce competitors and want to win, but also at the same time teach them the good sportsmanship as well? Is that both possible at the same time?
Oh, yeah, I do think so. I think that you have to teach class and sportsmanship and character in sports, period. If you lose, you need to lose with dignity and pride and go shake their hand because they beat you.
Yeah.
If you win, you need to do the same thing. And whether it's by 10 points, 20 points, or whatever it is. And I always tell my kids, you treat somebody by who you are, not by who they are. Like that coach, it wouldn't matter to me what he did. You know what I mean? We're going to act a certain way because of who we are.
That's a great way to put it.
And so it's never affected me any way. Coach has ever, whether he's beat me by 30 or 2 or whatever, we beat them by 30 or 2. You still have to respect that person because they're doing the same job that you are.
Yeah.
And they are facing the same difficulties that you are in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He's that coach in Arroyo. I don't think he handled the situation very well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I also think that it was blown a little bit out of proportion. Also, I think that it should have been brought to his attention that you shouldn't do that. You know, and you can teach your kids to beat people and to work hard and keep that same integrity about you without just dismantling a team.
With the reasoning that we got to still play the way we play. Yeah, and that's true. And like you said, God bless the media, but they attached onto that like leeches, and that's how the blown out proportion comes into play. But and that happens, and I'm sure that's happened before. I'm sure that's happened around the nation. Maybe not 160 points, but I'm sure 100 points or so. That's had to happen in other states and stuff. But we only heard about that one. Yeah.
Actually, when I was looking up a little bit about this topic before it came, I ran across in 1982, Cheryl Miller scored 105 points. I don't know if you remember that. Reggie Miller's sister scored 105 points in a game, and the opposing team only scored 15.
Oh, my gosh.
They beat them 179-15 during that game.
Wow.
And she scored 105 points. So, it's not the first time. And I looked, there's other things about football, beating teams 100-0 down in Texas, and it's not the first issue they've had in this. But, just like Cheryl Miller, she didn't have any idea how many points she scored either. You know what I mean? But
she's probably just in the zone, wasn't she?
How do you score 105 points in a game?
Not know it. Yeah. That's another issue.
And still be in the game.
So she definitely had to play a lot of serious minutes there. Yeah, she wasn't on the bench.
No.
Yeah. But and that's true too. And it comes to that point, there really is no rules saying, hey, coaches, you cannot beat this team by 100 points or more. No, don't do that. It's just kind of a sportsmanship thing between coaches and and integrity. There's no rules saying, hey, you can't do that, and it happens all the time. Like I said, football, baseball, even there's scores run up in it. All sports are, but wow.
Well, I wonder how does he find games? Is what I think. You know what I mean? Unless they're just a rule that's saying they have to play them, twice a year or this. You know what I mean? I mean, who would? Or is Bloomington going to play Arroyo next year?
I know.
I would hope not.
I hope not.
I wouldn't if I was the coach. I'd try to find somebody I could compete with.
You never know. With all this buzz surrounding it, it'd probably get more attention next year. That Bloomington coach might be for it. Who knows? Yeah. Who knows how he is? Yeah. Who really knows? But we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the possible future effects that blowout games can have on players on both ends of this scoreboard. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Pondering Show here on WKUR 94.9, your country road. We're joined here in the Don Franklin Chevy Buick GMC studio with Rockets boys head coach Benny Blinton. We've talked about both sides of the issue and both coaches' viewpoints. Now we're going to talk about what these effects can possibly have on these players in the future. The truth is some will go on to play college ball. Probably the ones at Arroyo. I struggle with that word. But, a lot of them will go on to jobs and stuff. And the things you learn in sports do transition over into life as well. So how will these games affect these players? So, like I mentioned before, a lot of players at Arroyo High School will go on to play ball at the college level. Now, does winning every college game by 50 points or more hurt or help them when it comes to playing college ball?
Well, you did touch on that a little bit about the UK players. I don't know. I'm sure you bring that winning attitude. It's going to help you in some ways, but then it's going to be a question of how they handle adversity and how they handle losing, because that's going to happen. If they're a good enough player to play on a high-level team, they're going to lose some games. Also, I could see it both ways. It's a tough issue about that. I mean, and how's it going to affect the kids that lost all those games? Is it like I said? They may persevere better in life than those other kids would.
Is that the truth? Yeah.
But and maybe if Bloomington had one player that was one or two players off of Arroyo's team, it'd be a question. It'd be a question to see how would they do? I don't know, and how would their attitude change if you moved them over to the Bloomington's team and tried to compete with other teams? It'd be a neat experiment, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. And you mentioned, every player, every person's different, and for some of these, people at that high school that go on to play college ball, some of them might be able to handle adversity a lot better. They might be able to snap out of it and just go back and just go right into the groove, and some don't. Some of us be on the bench carrying on, but they're all different. So it's like you said, it's really hard to put a finger on it and say, in one sense, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I've always thought that, it'd be hard to enjoy the good times if you didn't go through some bad times to realize how far you came. But I don't know, maybe if you were always on top, your goals might just get higher, and you may just, I want to be a college athlete, I want to be a professional athlete, or whatever. I want to be one of the better professional athletes. I want, who knows what LeBron's goal, somebody like that has been over the years, but the guy that's number one recruit out of high school, what was his goals? And, and he's done pretty well.
Yeah. I guess his only failure would be when they lost the, well, they don't call it championship in NBA, when they lost to Dallas at one time. I guess that'd be his only real one true failures, I guess. I don't know, but it's like you said, when they get to that point, when that's so high, what is their goals or failures?
What motivates them?
Yeah, or what motivates them? What makes them click?
And that probably separates a lot of players from elite, really great players to elite level players, Hall of Fame players.
Yes, exactly. And you touched on that. Players at Bloomington that usually don't get scholarships to play college ball, but they still learn all the things in sports that basketball teaches them, such as leadership and sportsmanship and all that stuff. Can they still learn all that life lessons that that they can learn, from losing like that, and transition into life? As far as trying to get jobs, getting denied when they go to apply for jobs and they don't get it. It's like you said, they kind of have an edge. They've experienced that failure, and they know adversity, they know how to respond to it, don't they?
Right. Oh, yeah, they do. And you think, let's take a kid from Bloomington and a kid at Arroyo, and they both go to college, whether one of them plays college basketball or not, and they both go into teaching, and they get out of school, they want to go into education, and they want to get a job teaching. They both apply for the same job. The principal is not going to look at, well, you played for Arroyo,
exactly.
Or you played for Bloomington, you win or lost it, you're going to go by your interview and what's best for kids, no matter what. And how those two individuals have persevered, or how they've handled their journeys will be the deciding factor either way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's those individuals' decisions. In the end,
it is.
You can coach the fire out of them. Parents can raise them all they can. But in the end, it really is the individual's decision when it comes to that.
It is.
Yeah.
I've been really lucky as in our high school that I've got some really great kids.
Yeah.
Their parents do a good job with them, and I've got some really good kids, and they really are coachable kids.
Yeah.
And whatever you coach them into, and which is kind of a pressure on you too. You want to make sure that they make the right decisions too. And but I've got some really good kids, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, you sure do. Yep, and they're doing good this year. Yeah, definitely too. And the other side of the coin on this. Now, some people or parents, like you mentioned in some of these articles, you saw some responses from the other side. They see the mercy rule and some of these, running the score up and the running clock and stuff. They see all this as way of, like Bloomington and these type of teams, as making excuses for getting beat so badly. Is that the right thinking, or what do you think about that?
Well, I did read a comment about this one lady, and she was like, why are we talking about the winning coach so much? Why wouldn't we be talking about the losing coach? Why about him getting suspended or him getting fired instead? I mean, if they're not very good, why don't they try to make their program better?
Yeah.
And that's a valid point. Why are you all not working to be where Arroyo's at instead of, downing them for beating you so bad? And that is a valid point, but Coach Chung, was the opposing coach, and I don't know any kind of situation that they're in, But I would, like I said before, I don't believe I would ever publicly say one way or the other about another coach. It would just be a personal thing between us, you know. And if I didn't like what you did, I would let you know, or not play you anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
And see, I don't know how that whole incident, developed, but apparently he must have been the one that went to the media or went to that other coach one. That Dale Chung must have did it, because he really had some comments to say to everybody that come in contact with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like you said. Yeah. You just go to that opposing coach. You keep it quiet. You let them know. You don't blow it up for the whole country to hear about it. In general. But and also saw a comment that was interesting. Part of adversity and failure is not making excuses for yourself. And there's some differing views, and that can kind of become a gray area. Say you take a Bloomington player, and I've struggled the whole time trying to say the other school, I'm just going to say the other school, and you put both of them together, and they're trying to get this job, and the other school gets the job, the other player from the other school gets the job, and the Bloomington player doesn't. Well, they can just automatically say, well, it's because their resume is so much better. They can look at it as the way as making excuses. There is a difference. Part of adversity is not making excuses; it's just overcoming that, isn't it?
Right, it is. Mm-hmm. It is. I'd read a little bit about there was a football guy that made a comment on one of those things about how they were beating a team really bad when he was in high school, and his coach told him to not tackle a guy and to let him score, or coming down, and then there was a lot of comments after that. They're like, well, what's that teaching? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But that guy also went to say, it didn't mean that I wasn't going to tackle the next game because I did that either.
That's true.
But it would be hard for me to put my players out there and tell them not to play defense, or it would be hard for me to put my players out there and tell them not to attempt to score, because that's what that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I find it, you can argue either way about that. And the coach, his argument was, I needed to work on stuff for the future or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was one of my game plan, what we do or whatever. And I can understand that to a point. I just find it hard to believe that he would have to. His game plan is to turn everybody over before they get to half court.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a difference there. There really is. And it comes down to, you hear this a lot with fathers and sons playing basketball in the driveway. Letting the son win. Stuff like that. Does it come down to that point? That's an iffy issue too. Yeah. Some fathers wouldn't let the son win until they get 16 or 17. It's just that people are different when it comes to those issues. Yeah, and in the end, what do you think really needs to be done for the betterment of the players in all these situations such as these, on the winning side and on this losing side?
Well, I think redistricting or finding level competition is a main thing. Of course, you're going to have lopsided wins. Heck, you see it in the NFL.
Yeah.
You see it in the NBA. I mean, there's going to be games that people are going to win by 40, points sometimes, no matter what level it is. But I do think that they could do a little better job. I mean, I don't see how they could beat teams consistently by 80 or 90 points. If they are, they're not doing a very good job scheduling. There has to be teams in California that could compete against
them. It's a big state.
It's a big state, yeah. And at Bloomington, the same thing for them. There's got to be teams who are these other teams they're beaten by 80 or 90 points. They need to play each other, I believe, some of them.
Yeah.
But as far as the betterment, I don't know really what you can do. The running clock is a good rule. I think the Mercy rule, in Kentucky is for 35 points or more. Just leave it running, and it works out good.
Yeah.
As far as that goes, the betterment of the kids. I've still an argument that it's just about. Kids on either side can choose what they want to do. They can persevere and do it. But if those kids that do persevere and keep coming back to practice every day, even on a losing team, can be very successful in life.
That's right.
Just don't give up. Don't quit.
That's right. It all comes down to them. It's like I said, you can parents can raise them, and coaches can coach them, but it all still comes down to their individual decisions in the end. Yeah, and we see that a lot on both sides. Yeah. Unfortunately, and. Well, it looks like we're out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate you having me on today. I enjoyed it.
We appreciate you coming, and I want to once again thank Benny Blank for coming in, and I also want to thank you for listening to us, and we'll see you here next Saturday at 11 a.m. on WKUR 94.9, and have a great weekend, and go Cats.